You're listening to Sirens, a true crime podcast, brought to you by the Sirens Network. This podcast contains explicit content, so listener discretion is advised. The opinions expressed on this podcast are solely the views of the hosts and do not reflect the views of affiliates, associates, or sponsors of this podcast. This is Sirens, a true crime podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jamie Baines. Today's guest is Raven Rollins, a fellow podcaster from Ada, Oklahoma. I came across Raven when one of my previous guests went on Raven's podcast. I decided to check out her website, and I liked what I saw. So I reached out to her and asked if she'd like to be a guest on my show. After all, her podcast focuses on true crime, and I'm a retired homicide detective, so it seemed like a great match. Turns out it was, and here we are. I hope you enjoy the interview. And welcome back to the podcast. Today's guest is actually fellow podcaster Raven Rollins. How are you, Raven?
I am good. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much for being on. Now, you tell me the name, first of all, of your podcast, and I'll let people know how we kind of came in contact with each other.
We are Sirens, a true crime podcast, but we also go by the Sirens podcast.
Okay, and so I know it's kind of self-explanatory, but what is it that you do? What is your podcast about?
So we cover, obviously, true crime, but we kind of evolved from talking amongst ourselves. We wanted to elevate the podcast and kind of set it aside from other true crime podcasts, and so I started doing some networking and reaching out to, experts in the field. And so we've just kind of gone from there. And so, we have had criminologists, victimologists, attorneys, prosecutors, true crime authors, investigators, all kinds of people in the mix. And so we're just trying to elevate, and mainly our goal is to not just tell true crime stories, but to inform people so that they can keep themselves safe as well.
And I came across you because you actually interviewed somebody that I interviewed as well, Vic Ferrari, correct?
Yes.
Larry is a New York cop, so I reached out to you because I thought it'd be very interesting to get your take on the crime scene, if you would. And how did you get started in it? You're very interested in it, I guess, because you started as true crime, but so where does that come from?
So it probably started with my love for horror, the horror genre. And then I can remember the very first true crime book that I ever picked up was next to my grandmother's bedside, which was a book about, it was The Dreams of Ada, which is where I lived. And I was like, oh, this couldn't have happened here in my small town, my perfect little small town. And so, it just kind of budded from there. And I ended up just, while I was actually in high school, senior in high school, ended up going to work for a lawyer. I learned, a lot about law through that. I worked for her and other lawyers for, over a decade, almost, I think, 15-ish years, and ended up learning how to do, legal research and legal assistant and all of this stuff. And then I just kept building on that. They send you to all of these seminars and you end up learning more and more and more. And so I got into my lawyer that I worked for specifically was a domestic violence expert and an expert in strangulation and a law professor and a judge. And so I really learned a lot from her, and going to all of these seminars, the ones that she gives herself, and I just kept learning and going. And then I ended up going to school for private investigation and just learned on top of that. So I like to keep learning. So,
Did you ever want to parlay that into actually becoming a police officer?
I went to EMT school back in the day, and I actually worked 911 dispatch for about 2 years. And I realized when I was doing that that the very last call I remember very vividly taking, and it was literally a standoff, 2 men, and they ended up shooting each other, and both passing away. And, hearing that live happening right then and there in front of you, right then I was like, this is not for me. I've got to find some sort of after the fact thing that I can do, and that kind of pushed me more into maybe like the court system and the actual investigation part of it. I've always told my husband I'd make a great detective as long as I don't have to arrest anyone. Just let me do the investigation part of it and I'll be great.
So is that how your podcast kind of came to be and how it evolved?
Yes. I was sitting around, and anyone that will talk true crime with me, I would just talk about case after case after case. And a lot of people were like, you need to start a podcast. And I was like, a podcast? What's a podcast? I had never heard a podcast before I started one, ever. And so I was like, I went into it going, I'm not even going to listen to one, because if I do this, I'm going to do it my way. I want to structure it my way. I don't want anything to influence how I do things. And so, yeah, I ended up just kind of segueing into talking about true crime for other people.
And what has the response been from your listeners and everybody? Are they fascinated by your podcast? Do they enjoy it?
I really, truly started out thinking that no one would listen to this but my mother. I'm going to try it and see what happens. I'll put it out there. And, if people like listening to it, then I'll continue doing it. If it doesn't, no one listens at all, then, I'll go back to talking about it in my basement or whatever. But yeah, I mean, the first season that I did, we included a lot of cases from my hometown of Ada, Oklahoma. Now, most people know Ada as, the home of, the Innocent Man. The book and, the series on Netflix. That's where I'm from.
You got a decent pedigree for it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so I was just kind of like, there is so much more going on in Ada, Oklahoma than just this case. And I think people would be truly surprised at how much murder and corruption goes on in Ada. And so that's kind of where I started was, let's tell these Ada stories. I don't know, it just kind of took off. I mean, we were getting, listen after listen. We ran up our listens really quickly, and I thought, okay, well, maybe I can do this.
It's working. It's working.
It's working. Keep doing it. Whatever we're doing, keep doing it. The big thing about it is that these Ada cases that we talked about, we didn't start with the Innocent Man because, that had just been a thing in a book. And I thought, let's start with these obscure cases that hasn't seen the light of day, that not a lot of people know happen literally, maybe probably in their backyard. And, we just started getting a lot of good words from family and friends of these victims that said, some of these cases are still unsolved, and we're so glad that, you're putting it back out there. And, those circulated. And then eventually we branched out into all of Oklahoma, and now we've branched out into all of the southern states. So it's pretty crazy. It's wild.
The Ada ones, I guess you knew about from growing up there. How do you decide on what case that you want to do? Do you have a team of researchers?
Well, so initially it was just me, and I recruited a fellow Aiden to come and co-host, and she co-hosted with me for about 2 years until her personal life and she was trying to start her own business and all this stuff, and so she eventually had to quit. And that's when I was like, well, what am I going to do now? Because I have been, she has been with me for 2 years, and I kind of went, you know what? Let's get a crew. Why not? Let's up the ante. Let's get some experts in here. Let's talk to a bunch of different people. Let's have a bunch of different co-hosts. So, now that I have a crew, we kind of sit down in the office and go, okay, well, what do you think that we should talk about this season, you know, we have too many serial killers on the list, so nix a couple of those. We should probably bring in some more, you know, domestic violence cases, bring that to light. You know, we have this one where I can get a strangulation expert. I have another where we can talk about genetic genealogy. I have an expert for that. You know, we kind of work it that way. Initially, it was just me going, okay, well, I have a list of Ada cases, and then I have a list of Oklahoma cases, and whatever flowed together is kind of how I put it together. Now it's definitely a team effort. You know, some of my team comes to me and goes, I would like to present this case. I've been super interested in this. It happened near my home or whatever. And so, you know, they're super passionate about it. And so we have a lot coming up in season 4. We're about to close out season 3, and season 4 is just going to get even more phenomenal. So I'm really excited about that.
Are you enjoying what you're doing? Are you enjoying having this much work to do?
You know, of course, we don't get paid for anything that we do. I think, you know, we have like 10 subscribers or something that actually pay for, you know, our extra content or something. And we just started that, so we're just kind of feeling it out there. But
well, I know we tried to start this in May, and you've been so busy until August. So yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, because I have so many people now on the team, I have to schedule everything out like at least a year in advance.
Wow.
And so I always, I know.
Golly,
I know.
Awesome.
I literally have things on the schedule right now for up to June 2023.
Wow. Is that exciting? It's got to be just thrilling to be so busy even a year out.
Yes, I know. You know, it's wild. I would have never thought, you know, at the end of season 2, I was like, okay, we're getting pretty popular. We recently just hit 100,000 downloads and streams, and so I was like,
fantastic.
We gotta mix it up somehow. Yeah, and so I was like, I think I need to start like laying down an actual schedule. And so now we have a recording schedule. we have an editing schedule. We have an event schedule. I mean, yeah, I'm kind of OCD about that stuff too. So
or is that your wheelhouse? Is this your lane? You mean, you said you're OCD, so this is what you do. This is what you like to do.
I had this event back, what was it? 2012, 2013, I forget. The last Moore, Oklahoma tornado came through. And I organized a huge benefit for that. And although it was absolutely chaotic and insane, and I was in charge of hundreds of people, I kind of felt like I worked under pressure like that. And so, yeah, it's a lot like that. I mean, I'm constantly planning events. I think I have, oh my gosh, how many people do I have on my team? I have 6 people on my team right now. And of course, like each one of them has their own kind of specialty in it. I've got a victimologist professor that she's just great. And so of course I'm scheduling stuff with her, and we're trying to do events where we go out and we speak, and we're trying to put like some continuing education together for domestic violence for the first responders here in my area. And like we are constantly doing stuff. But yeah, I think that I kind of work under pressure that way. So I like it. I enjoy it. I do get overwhelmed sometimes, but yeah, I enjoy it a lot.
You or nobody on your team is working for pay, right? They're all doing it out of just loving what they're doing.
Yeah, none of us are paid a dime, and I make sure, like, we have a new girl in season 4. Her name is Scarlett, and when I recruited her, and we did kind of like a little test with her to see, you know, how she sounded on the air and stuff like that. But, you know, when I asked her if this is something she wanted to do, I was like, listen, we do not make any money. We work a lot of hours, a lot of, you know, prep is research, and you're going to be doing that on your own. And of course, you know, I'll show you, you know, if you have any questions about research, I'm always there to help or whatever. But for the most part, like, this is unpaid. And I just want to make sure that you're ready to take that on, because it can be a lot. It really can.
Recruiting pitch, Raven. That is some recruiting pitch.
I know.
We're going to work you and work you and work you and not pay you. You want the job? Yes, sign me up.
Exactly. It's wild because, even the ones that I still have on, I'm like, okay, you need to tell me if I'm giving you too much to do. You need to tell me if I'm overwhelming you so that I can, I'm changing the schedule. I want to make sure everybody isn't overwhelmed. Tell me now. It's kind of that situation because, this is... it's my podcast. I started it and I can do it alone, but I absolutely love having all of these people here to support me and help me and make this thing happen and flow the way that it does. And I even have one now that literally sometimes sits beside me and is just my producer. Literally will just say, "Oh no, move it along. Keep going or cut that or whatever." And I'm like,
"Oh, right, yes, yeah."
Especially in my author interviews, yeah, because sometimes I like to ramble, as you can tell. So.
No, I love hearing people talk. I think the world needs more people talking and just enjoying what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I love what I do. I never thought that we would get this popular. We've been on the charts several times now. We've charted as high as number 6 on the Good Pods charts.
Why do you think people are so fascinated with true crime?
I'm fascinated with it because I am obsessed with prevention. Mm-hmm. And I'm also obsessed with, the why, the big question why. Why did this happen? And how can we prevent it from happening in the future?
That's a really good way to look at it. I never thought about it that way. And I bet a lot of people don't either. If you're watching Dateline or you're watching 48 Hours or something like that, I bet almost nobody is watching it for prevention of the crime.
But I really think a lot of us, especially women, watch it to go, what happened to her? What was her situation? How can I avoid that situation in the future? How can I keep myself out of a situation like that and maybe prevent this from happening to me or my sister or my daughter or, something like that. So
very good.
Yeah,
point.
and
I'm sure this is in your questioning. A lot of people ask me why do I even do this? Why do I even have a true crime podcast? What's my main point in this? And my answer is, why do you teach your children to look both ways when they cross the road? So you teach them because you want to keep them safe, but it's not only about keeping them safe, it's about explaining to them what they're looking for when they look both ways. Well, you're looking for a car. Okay, well, how can a car harm you? It's kind of the same scenario here. I'm trying to help people look both ways before they cross the road, and in some cases, hold their hands as they cross the road.
Mm-hmm. And do you get feedback on that? Do people know that's one of the reasons that you do your podcast? Do you put that out there so people know that?
I have probably mentioned it. We have, we're coming up on 100 episodes, and it's getting to the point where I can't remember what I've talked about.
Personally, what I've said and what I haven't.
Which could be a good thing and a bad thing. That means maybe that's a measure of success.
Yeah, but I'm sure I've mentioned it a time or two. We were just talking about possibly doing a bonus episode on true crime ethics, and what we should be and shouldn't be doing as a true crime podcast. And kind of, holding the standards higher for people in this business. Mm-hmm. I think, if you meet me, you'll know that I'm passionate about it. I want to learn, I want to teach, and I just want to keep people safe. So.
And do you get feedback from women specifically about that? Or saying, hey, Raven, I heard what you're saying. That really strikes close to home. Thank you for bringing this up, and Frank, thank you for talking about it.
Yes, I've had a lot of those. A lot. Yeah, I do get a lot of good feedback. A lot of people saying, thank you for speaking up about domestic violence. Thank you for speaking up about sexual assault. Even in my podcast, I recently came out as a sexual assault victim. So, it's just talking about what's important to me and what I feel like should be talked about more in society. I have always tried to stay away from sensationalized serial killers like Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez and, stuff like that, and kind of bring it back down to, well, these are some other ones that you may not have heard about, and this is, what they did, and this is why, and if we have a serial killer. But usually it is, we talk about domestic violence a lot. We talk about a lot of crimes that are lesser known, especially in the Oklahoma area. We get feedback a lot, and really that's what keeps me going, at least, because even if one person sends me a message that says, I just listened to that podcast and thank you so much for X thing, for mentioning X thing or whatever, or even talking about X person's case, I'm just like, okay, I'm doing something right here. So
I'm telling you, you're segueing me into each thing I want to hit. As I end each podcast, I like asking, what keeps you positive? What keeps you going? Because I know you said you're a sexual assault survivor. A lot of these crimes you look at can be depressing and distressing. You said you're OCD. What keeps you positive?
Well, it does get daunting. I mean, this line of work is not for everyone. You're looking at case files, you're looking at crime scene photos. I mean, it's the same as first responders, investigators, anyone who's in, even, attorneys that have to go through this stuff. It does get daunting, and there are definitely some cases that literally haunt me. Cases that, I just cannot let go of. And it can be cathartic, when I get a hold of that bone, a dog on a bone, and I'm like, I have to talk about this case. It is cathartic, and sometimes just by talking about the case on the show, I can let that case go. But there are a lot of other ones that I can't let go. And so, it gets to be a lot sometimes. But it is definitely those people that send me and send the page private messages that say, thank you so much for coming out, as a sexual assault survivor. That allowed me to, finally tell my husband what happened to me, or finally tell my mom, or tell my, grandma, whatever. I finally came out, and it gave me the courage. Or the ones that say, I did not know X thing. I'm so glad that you had this expert on to explain this thing. Especially, we just had a SANE nurse on, and I have had several people say, I did not know, that I didn't have to get the cops involved, that they would hang on to that kit for so long. I didn't know what to expect until your podcast. And it's definitely things like that. The people who are enjoying this, yes, I'm so glad that they enjoy it. But it's mostly the people who are getting something out of this. And I keep going because I do have a lot now that we're more popular. We were on the front page of my hometown paper not too long ago. And we had a lot of cases roll in that way. And that keeps me going as well. That keeps me in a way positive. Oh, there are still stories to be told. There are still victims that don't have voices that I can still give a voice to. So that also helps me keep going. And the support of friends and family, and saying, you're doing something that I feel like it matters. A lot of people go, oh, a true crime podcast. They roll their eyes.
I feel like we're not.
I feel like we're not your average true crime podcast. We're not just, two people who've never worked in the field, who don't know what they're talking about, sitting in the dark and telling each other stories without, true facts or, whatever. So we put a lot of research in it. We put a lot of thought in it. We even do a lot of editing. There's a lot of thought, a lot of work that goes into it. And so,
well, I appreciate the time you've given me today. Where can people find you?
Everywhere.
Literally. Every, that's it. Wrapping it up. Hang it up right now. You can find Raven everywhere. That's all, folks. Good night. That's it, guys. What'd you think of Raven? To be honest with everyone, I never heard of Ada, Oklahoma, nor The Innocent Man before talking to Raven. That's what I enjoy about these podcasts. The chance to talk to and learn from people who come from all walks of life. Raven took me completely off guard when she told me that one of the main reasons that she focuses on true crime in her series is for prevention and situational awareness. I can almost guarantee you that shows that make big money off true crime could give a damn about preventing crime in the future. That, I think, is the difference between independent shows like Ravens and shows put on by large media corporations that only care about money, not people. The world needs more people like Raven and more people like my listeners. We're all in this together, so let's take care of each other. Check out the link for Raven's website below, and as always, thanks for listening.
You've reached the end of our episode. All suspects are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Join Raven next time on the Sirens Podcast.
Do we have an outro? That's our outro, isn't it?